Welcome. This is the introduction to energy efficiency. It's not that hard. And that is the main lesson I want you to take away today. It's not that hard to make energy efficient games, and more people should be doing it. But first things first, this talk is for beginners and non-tech oriented people. So if what I say seems very obvious, it's because it is. But it still needs to be said. So first of all, who am I? That's me. That's not me, that's a cat, but that is also me. I'm the co-founder and studio lead at Bold Beetle Games, a small indie company. I'm also the technical coordinator of the Sustainable Games Alliance Energy Efficiency Network. And as we all know, the longer the title, the more important the person. But most importantly, I still care about climate change. And that is really the most key aspect you need when you're talking about energy efficiency. Right. So what is energy efficiency? It's the act of reducing energy consumption in your game without impacting the player experience. So we're not trying to make a worse game, we're trying to make the same game but make it run better. And optimizing for energy efficiency starts after traditional optimization. So in normal game development, you do optimize to a certain threshold that you set at the beginning, and then you stop. But it's about doing the same. It's about doing more with the same. So you have a hardware limit and you want to push it as hard as you can. You want to render as many blades as grass as possible. Energy optimization is doing the same with less. So you want to say, okay, we have the technical capability to render 2 million blades of grass, but we will only render 1 million to save on energy. And I get it, if your first reaction to hearing that is great, that's another thing I have to do. Because as game developers, we have to do project management, we have to do marketing, community work, business development, networking, accounting, and at that point you haven't started making a game. There is so much to do, so why should you care? I've brought a helpful diagram, so that is our planet. And that is our planet without energy-efficient games. But if we all, as developers, come together, make the games industry as efficient as possible, our planet could look like this. Worth it. In all seriousness, climate change is real, and any impact you can make to reduce the CO2 emissions is a good one. But if we ignore the spinning rock we're all calling a home for a second, we can focus on what's really important here, and that is you. Because focusing on energy efficiency is actually not just good for the planet, it's good for your company. It creates a positive brand image around your company. It says, okay, look, we actually care about something. It's really good for networking opportunities. I actually talked to the CEO of a publisher that rejected us, just saying, hey, you should make your games more energy efficient. And now we're in talks if maybe they want to publish our game after all. It's also an advantage when securing funding, especially local funds. They tend to say, like, okay, what do you do for the planet? What makes your product sustainable? And the tools I'm going over actually have been proven to reduce the CO2 emissions of games. So you can actually say something and create something meaningful. And you're prepared for the upcoming climate regulation that is bound to happen at some point, hopefully. But it's also good for your players. Creating energy-efficient games reduces the stress on the hardware, making it last longer. It reduces fan noise, and there's even specific advantages to each optimization. So for every optimization that I will go over, I will also say this is how it benefits your players. Some of the basics first, though. You need to optimize your game. That is still an unfortunate reality. So an unoptimized game is not an energy-efficient game. So that is an important step that you need to do. And you need to measure you can measure your power draw. You can buy a voltmeter, it's $10. And then you can actually see and measure how to, what parts of your game use the most energy and where you can reduce it. But there are some general rules, mostly that the GPU uses vastly more power than the CPU. It's like 5 or 10 times, depending on the device. So you really want to optimize your graphics as much as possible. And certain games will use less power by default. Something like Thomas Was Alone, where it's just colored rectangles bouncing around, is going to be less graphics intensive than the new Call of Duty. But there's still things we can do. No, namely, the first step you can do is just keep optimizing your game forever. Just never stop. You know, the game becomes it creates a lot of player advantages because the game becomes available on lower-end devices, and you're expanding your player base. You can port it to more games. There is a big con, though. That is way too much work. Do not do this. Only optimize in moderation and when you have easy targets. So it's good to keep optimization in mind, but you do want to be mindful about it. It's a rabbit hole that you can definitely get lost in over-optimizing every little thing. And we're going to focus on low-hanging fruit instead. So the first one is set an FPS limit. That is super easy, but Godot doesn't have an FPS limit by default. So if your user is on a device that has a 240 Hz screen, your game will run at 240 FPS, basically uncapped. And so the GPU is spending a lot of time drawing frames that your players won't notice. Just set the FPS limit to 60. It's literally one setting. It's not a lot of work. And for the players, there's less hardware stress, and you can actually expose the settings expose the FPS in the settings so that players can customize their experience more, deciding if they want more frames or if they want better battery usage. And the effort required is literally nothing. And then in the next step, we can further reduce FPS in menus, because menus do not require fast inputs like the actual gameplay does. So if your game is very menu-based, you can reduce it by a lot. Just setting the max FPS to 30 can really help there. And again, it reduces hardware stress and fan noise. There are actual games that have uncapped menus, where the menus are the most drawing part on the CPU because they run at 1,000 frames. And like, again, it's not that much work, but it can save you a lot of time, and it can save a lot of energy. Then after that, if you want to get more advanced, you can detect if your player is idle. Basically saying, okay, if you're not playing the game, then we don't need to render it. And of course, that means that we can save on GPU power. So when the player hasn't pressed any buttons for a certain amount of time, you can reduce the render scale, reduce the max FPS. And if the player hasn't pressed the button for a much longer period of time, just disable the game logic and disable the rendering. And that reduces battery drain close to nothing. So if you're on a Steam Deck, you put it down, you forgot to pause, this will help you turn the battery usage to very low. And I also feel like it's a psychological thing where if you go back, you don't feel like you missed anything because the game wasn't running. It tells you, oh, I've paused the game for you. The effort required to implement this is also very low, but I will go over tools to make it even lower. A similar idea is pause when minimized. So if the player minimizes the window, just hit the pause screen. If you combine it with the limited 30 FPS, if you actually disable rendering in the pause menus, this can also just reduce GPU load at times when it isn't necessary. And it's also just convenient for the player to tap out of the game and not have to hit pause before. It's just a quality of life feature. Another thing, it's pause when controllers disconnect. It's a similar idea. If a controller disconnects, then your player is probably not playing the game and you want to pause it for them. And the advantages for the players, and I will go off script here and just do a little rant. The amount of times I've died in Silksong because my controller ran out and just flew into a pit. Insane. Bile water was hell. And the effort required also, very little. But it's also just, this one is more for games that can't do other energy optimization techniques. I still want you to do it because it's just very convenient. Also, don't render your entire game when you're in a menu. Again, seems obvious, but many games have the game rendering still active if you're in a pause menu. So there are multiple ways to solve that. If you want to have the menu visible if you want to have the game world visible behind the player, if it's a single player experience, you can pause the game, then just take a blur, put a blur over that and use that as a backdrop. Alternative solution, if your game needs to run while you're in a menu, you can reduce the render scale of the game. That will also help reduce GPU load where it isn't needed. And for players, it's a lot easier to focus on menus when there's not a lot going on behind them. And the effort required here is a bit higher because you do need to do the blurring and do the screenshot of the game. Yeah, but that is still 8. And then another point, just add a battery saver graphics preset. You're most likely to do graphics preset anyways. Just give the player the choice, if they're playing on Steam Deck, to choose between graphical fidelity and a longer battery life. Mobile gaming is becoming bigger, so focusing on energy efficiency can also be a competitive advantage there. Don't call it eco mode. That's something that more games do, but it's misleading because it sort of feels like when you're playing it and then it's like, okay, I can go eco mode or I can go eco-terrorist mode because I want my game to look pretty. That's a bad choice. I mean, especially because games aren't that power intensive. So just be honest and be transparent about it. It's saying we implemented an eco mode looks good for the company, but it's usually not good for the player. And for the player, it just gives them options. And it's also very little effort if you just have graphics presets already. Just add an option that sets the maximum FPS to 30, and you're good to go. I think we have a lot of time, so I'm going to do a bonus round because this was it about energy efficiency. I will now tell you how to make your studio very climate friendly. The first one is tangentially related to energy efficiency. It's optimizing the file size of your game. So reducing the file size of the game reduces the amount of energy required when it gets distributed. So on Steam, it takes up less hardware, less space, and it takes less time to download. For players, that is good because they get faster download times and less space taken up on the hardware. And for you, it is good because then players are more likely to download your game and less likely to uninstall it. When I need space, I go to Steam and I just search biggest games and just throw the biggest 5 out there. So if your game isn't on that list, if it doesn't need to be, that's good for you because it can increase your playtime. It is medium effort, but I can share some tips for optimizing the file size. The main one is the Godot PCK Explorer. You can use it to see all of the files in your game and sort them by size. So if there is just a big unused 4K texture in there, you will see it and you can throw it out. Another one, if you're working with less experienced artists, you can set a size limit for each texture. So even if it's a 4K texture, it gets reduced down to 512 pixels. I like to do this because I used to get 2K textures that had one single color. And with this, artists are forced to actually look at the thing in engine and see, okay, does this need a bigger texture? So we are reducing by default and only increasing when necessary instead of doing it the other way around. And another fun tool, if you want to get really technical, is the MIP Explorer. So you can explore a texture and see where the detail is in the MIP maps. So you can see like this texture has a lot of detail in the early MIP maps because it's very granular. So it's good to have a high resolution texture. But other textures might have a lot of detail in the lower end. So you can compress it down without losing any detail. Another bonus, don't fly. And like it looks obvious, but for indie games, the biggest CO2 emission that some studios have is just flying to events, and that reduces the climate balance of your game because for many of us, we won't have that many players. It's unfortunate, but it's the reality. So flying to Gamescom once a year is going to tank your game's CO2 levels. And like we're getting to the obvious part now. Use green local cloud services and energy providers just to power your game. This is the one we use. It's German. It runs on clean energy. It's great. And like, have vegan lunches if you're eating out. Like, look, this isn't that hard. You're seeing that, right? And like, it gets even easier. We made some of the features. We turned them into an add-on that you can install on Godot, and it takes like 30 minutes to set up. And with that, you get FPS limits, menus, and idle states. And that's kind of it. And and I just want to share, because we shared our plugin on the Godot subreddit, and people generally liked it, but there was one person who didn't. He just looked at the code and says, it toggles 2 settings and displays a transparent black rectangle over the screen. It's hardly revolutionary. And he was right. And still that add-on, like Fortnite implemented similar energy saving measures, and they only have them in the menus. They reduced their energy consumption by 15% on the player's end, which in Fortnite's case meant they saved 14 windmills worth of energy that are running a year. That's an entire wind park with a day's worth of work of adding these features, which is why what's next? We need to create awareness around this. Just share it with people and say, hey, this is a thing you can do. It takes a day of work and it's actually going to help you a lot, and it's going to make your game better as a result. And then if you want to take it a step further, you can find and share your own best practices. There's still a lot that can be found, that can be done in order to make games more efficient. Even expanding Godot's capabilities. I know we are part of the Sustainable Games Alliance, and I know that they want to create a feature request that you could see Godot's energy usage in the profiler, right? So as the game is running, you could measure the energy draw. That would be a good feature to add. I don't know how to do that, but maybe some of you do, and I would love to see it get put into and implemented into Godot at some point. Anyways, that's it. I've included some extra resources here for additional viewing. Some of them are quite dense. And that is like one of the issues about energy efficiency. Like they are long form studies, like with like 10 pages white paper, and all that they say is, yeah, limit your FPS. So if you're thinking me giving a talk here is unnecessary, just look at these papers. It's amazing. But no, they're actually great even for you as a resource, because when somebody asks you, what are you doing for energy efficiency? You're saying, yeah, we're limiting the menu FPS. And they're saying, well, how much good is that going to do? You have the resources available to show them, actually, that's saving quite a lot of energy. Yeah, that's it. Any questions?
In another slide, you said that like GPUs consume way more than CPUs. Although like best practice, I think, is to offload stuff as much as possible to the GPU. So like, is it better to be clever with the GPU or use it as little as possible to save energy efficiency? I don't know.
I mean, you want to use the GPU as little as possible, but that's not always going to be possible depending on the game you're making. So you really want to save on the GPU side where it is, possible, seeing if you can reduce the complexity of your shaders, see if you can reduce the amount of triangles, or just, don't use the GPU when it isn't needed, which is mainly what the tools are about.
Yeah, but if I had to choose between higher CPU consumption and higher GPU consumption, which should I choose?
If you're just talking about energy efficiency, CPU consumption is better. But that's like not likely to be the case because you also need to consider other factors, right? So for example, we are developing a game that's very CPU intensive. So we're trying to push as much on the GPU as possible to get the game running smoothly. But still we are like optimizing our models and keeping the style so that it still uses the GPU less. Yeah, does that?
Yeah, that's a satisfying answer. So yeah, it's complicated, but thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for the talk. It's a bit of more of an open-ended question, I guess. Thinking less on the development of the game itself and maybe more towards like the office company style of that, but more for like bold practices. There was actually a conference in Amsterdam, it was like a year or two ago, on digital permaculture, and it added a lot of interesting conversation points on like the systems and technology that we use to build things in general. And I think there's some interesting things that are related to this. For example, if you've got like a build server, maybe it's interesting to think about how often are you making, for example, hourly builds? Do they need to be hourly? Or like the surrounding frameworks that we use that we don't think about. are we using Google Drive for our files when we could have like a local NAS or something, right? That's constantly transferring data up, and when you load that website, it's going to load like some super heavy set of frameworks, etc. The software that we use, right? Are we using some crazy Microsoft Office suite with 10,000 features and add-ons that we're not really using versus something more local? Do you have any advice on these types of things? It's not really like the company flying to Gamescom or something, but more like the surrounding technologies that we use to build a game.
Very interesting topic. So we are a small indie development team. We mostly work from home, so our infrastructure is very small. But we do focus on if we add infrastructure like a cloud service, we do so in a way that is sustainable first. So I think most of you here are indies, and I think what's important is that you start thinking about these topics as you're scaling up, because when you have all of these systems implemented, as you said, it's very hard to go back and think, are we doing this in a sustainable manner? But when you're choosing a cloud service, you can think, okay, should I choose Google Drive or should I maybe look at something local? And if you haven't set anything up, then it's a lot less effort than doing the work that you have done. But unfortunately, I'm not the best expert in hardware infrastructure that you could find, just due to the size of our company.
Okay, thank you.
Fantastic talk, first of all. Specifically, so it seems like in large studios, the ways of optimization and energy efficiency are such a thing of the past. We see things like one of the recent Call of Duty games just being like 150 gigs on its own, and just like it feels like optimization is just like completely forgotten about. Is there anything that like we can do as a community to, I guess, push for optimization to be something that people care about again, especially at like the larger studio level? Because it feels like demoralizing to see that sometimes.
It's funny that you say that, because Call of Duty has a sustainable case study on one of the websites here. No, it's interesting because from like being in that space, it's usually big companies or like they have sustainability people that actually do all of the testing and all of the work. And I think within these companies, these people are already pushing to get that as big as possible. I think if you want to create a more major push, you do need to addressing the players first and saying, okay, energy optimization doesn't mean some eco bullshit. It's not woke gaming. It is, but you have to say that it's not. And then you instead have to focus on, actually, we just want your game to run better on Steam Deck. We want your game to fit on every Steam Deck. So like, for example, bigger companies, I don't know which game did that, but there was a game that was like, okay, so the base textures in the game are all 2K, but you can download a 4K DLC for every texture. So that just increases the texture resolution for the people that need it. And we could push more, or we could ask more, but unfortunately only as players, or using our networking tools. If we are lucky, we will see some of these measures implemented into smaller indie games, to the point where, like Celeste, for example, they pushed big for accessibility and different gameplay options, and now we are seeing like that move also in AAA. I think another thing that is possible would be if bigger indies start implementing the battery saver options and the idle states, then we could see a push that goes up through to the big companies. But unfortunately, like what I said about those 10-page white papers, that's just a study about setting the FPS limit to 60 FPS. That is usually what it takes to reach a C-level employee at a big company. Or at least that's why I believe these papers are created. And what we can do is just share these measures on a local indie level and then move up from there.
Yeah, fantastic. And thank you for actually proving me wrong. I'm happy to be told I'm wrong about that. It's great to hear they do care about those things.
I mean, some people at the companies care. I don't know how much of the... there are sustainability people at Xbox, but also Bill Gates said, yeah, the fight against climate change has been lost. So big companies aren't like a monogamous thing of opinion, obviously, and there are people inside that try to care, and we can try to uplift them as much as possible while telling Bill Gates to fuck off.
Thank you. Woo!
All right, we have. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for the talk, first of all. Do you have any reflections on the highly popular genre of idle games that kind of act like a crypto miner, but with flashing lights? Any words?
Yeah, so unfortunately, idle games, you cannot really implement idle energy saving into those. But in terms of like games that have little gameplay required, the best thing you can do is just setting the FPS limit to 30 FPS as a default. Because that can, just compared to uncapped FPS, that can save up to 50% of the GPU usage and of the energy drain. And especially for idle games, you don't need those 60 FPS. And for like something like Slay the Spire 2, for example, it's like a good example of how indies can actually could push this narrative. They've reached millions of players, and I think even like they have mobile ports and they're popular on Steam Deck. So them just having a battery saver mode and even having 30 FPS as a default, that could also be a good push for energy saving. But yes, that is an important point of like how you also need to make sure that the energy saving tools you're implementing fit your exact game. I try to include the ones that are like all purpose to 99% of games, but you still have to mix and match. Yeah.